Dan Rivera dedicated his life to exploring the unexplained. As a very respected paranormal investigator, he spent years and years educating people about haunted history, the paranormal, and helping others feel safe in that unknown feeling. Just days ago, Dan was doing exactly what he loved to do all of these years, guiding visitors through one of the most talked about haunted tours in the country. Then suddenly, and very tragically and sadly, he was gone. So today we're just going to take a closer look at what exactly happened to Dan, what the tour meant to him, and what we know about the very heartbreaking moment that this paranormal world lost one of its own. And I'm sure you all know by now the circumstances under which it happened. So there's also some talk about how it happened and why he died. So we're also just going to take a closer look at that. And if you're a fan of the scary, disturbing, or just unsettling, then you're definitely in the right place. That is topics that I love to discuss on this channel. And if you want to see more content like that, then don't forget to hit the subscribe button. So firstly, who was Dan Rivera? Well, Dan wasn't just some random guy tagging along on ghost tours. He was genuinely respected in the paranormal world. He had this very calm energy about him. He was very kind, very grounded, and very, very passionate about what he did and very passionate about the paranormal. People who met him didn't just remember the stories he told, they definitely remembered the person that he was. He made people feel very safe, and people often had open conversations with him about their own paranormal experiences, and that was just the kind of person that he was. He loved to listen to people's own paranormal experiences, and he continuously inspired people to share their experiences. So he lived in Connecticut, and he was a US Army veteran, and more importantly, he was both a husband and a dad to 4 kids. His family definitely meant a lot to him, and from everything that I've read and watched, you could 100% tell that he carried that same protective spirit into his work with the paranormal. So the reason Dan was so known in the paranormal world was because he worked with the New England Society for Psychic Research, or NESPR, and this group was originally founded by the very famous paranormal experts Ed and Lorraine Warren, the duo behind all of the Conjuring movies. If you have seen them, if you have not seen them, definitely go watch them. And Dan was actually personally mentored by Lorraine herself, which is a huge, huge opportunity, and pretty incredible to be mentored by the original paranormal investigator. He took that responsibility very seriously, of course, and he didn't treat haunted objects or investigations like cheap entertainment. For him, it was very much about respect, education, and definitely protecting people. So Dan became the lead researcher at NESPR, and one of the very few people who was trusted to actually handle the real Annabelle doll. And I mean the actual one, not the movie prop. She looks very different to the movies. She is just a normal Raggedy Ann doll. So he actually led events, he gave talks, and he helped manage some of the most notorious items in the Warren collection. Ed and Lorraine Warren were known to have this room of all of these haunted objects and haunted artifacts that were connected to some pretty dark stuff. Dan also wasn't just behind the scenes. You might have seen him without realizing it if you are a fan of the paranormal and watch paranormal TV and shows. He actually worked as a consulting producer on Netflix's 28 Days Haunted, and he appeared in a bunch of shows on the Travel Channel and Discovery Plus. But even then, he never really acted like a TV personality. He always came across as a very down-to-earth guy, someone who was always in it to purely help people and not to chase the spotlight. He was really just following his passion of the paranormal, and then all of these opportunities came to him. I don't really think he was wanting to be famous. It just so happened that he became famous from it. Lately, Dan was also getting more active online too. He was doing lots of interviews, making TikToks, sharing insights and stories about the paranormal world. And honestly, his content was never about fear-mongering. I've never seen one piece of content from him that is fear-mongering. It was always very thoughtful, very grounded. He's a very educated man on the paranormal. And he definitely just wanted people to understand this stuff and approach it with caution and curiosity, not just fear. At the end of the day, Dan was someone who believed in guiding people through the unknown and not scaring them. I think that's why his passing kind of hit hard in the paranormal world, because we didn't just lose a paranormal investigator. He just genuinely was a very good person who made the scary stuff a little more human. And in this day and age, there are a lot of paranormal investigators who are not in it because they're passionate about it. They're in it for the money or they're in it for the spotlight. And Dan just didn't seem like one of those people. So let's talk a little bit about the tour that Dan was on when he sadly passed away. So the tour was called Devils on the Run, and it was a pretty big deal in the paranormal world. It was basically a national roadshow hosted by NESPR, which is the group that Dan worked with that I mentioned earlier, and they partnered with a few local ghost tour companies. And the star of the tour was the Annabelle doll, the real one. And if you don't know too much about the Annabelle doll, it is just, like I said earlier, a normal Raggedy Ann, looks like a little clown doll. Doesn't really look as scary as it does in the films, but according to Ed and Lorraine Warren, the doll was demonically possessed and linked to a bunch of disturbing activity that happened in the 1970s. Since then, this doll has been kept under lock and key in their local occult museum. I'm pretty sure Ed and Lorraine's museum was attached to their house. I'm not sure where it is now. Dan was one of the only people who was trusted to transport and handle the doll, and he of course took that very seriously. He followed very strict safety protocols, things like never touching it with your bare hands, always wearing gloves, always saying protective prayers before and after handling it, and so on. It wasn't just theatrics. For Dan, it was definitely about respect and not taking any chances, because he of all people knew what this doll was capable of. So the tour itself traveled across the US, stopping in cities where people could come and see the Annabelle doll for themselves, see it in person, hear about the cases that NESPR worked on, and learn how real investigators approach the paranormal, specifically how they would approach dealing with this doll. Dan would speak at these events, he would answer questions, and he would share his own paranormal experiences. And by all accounts, the events weren't just spooky, they were very thoughtful, very well thought out, and very emotional. Like I said, not theatrical at all. One of the last major stops was in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, a place already known for its very haunted history. The event took place at the Old Soldiers National Orphanage, which has its own reputation for paranormal activity, in fact. It was a completely sold out weekend. Lots of people attended the event. 3 days of tours, talks, and exhibits. And of course, Dan was front and center the whole time, interacting with people and educating them on the paranormal. The weird thing is that Dan seemed completely fine the whole time during the event. There were photos of the event showing him smiling with fans, chatting with guests, doing exactly what he loved, and nobody had any idea that something so tragic was just hours away. So here is what we know about those final hours. So the Gettysburg event, the last stop on the tour, wrapped up on Sunday, the 13th of July, 2025. Dan had just finished a packed weekend of presentations, guiding guests through the haunted orphanage, and of course, showcasing the Annabelle doll. From all reports, we hear that he seemed totally fine, smiling in photos, very relaxed, doing exactly what he did, nothing out of the ordinary. Then later that evening, Dan returned to his hotel room. He was traveling with a few fellow investigators, and they all headed back after the event had completely wrapped up. But in some time during that night, something went completely wrong. The next morning, Dan unfortunately didn't go downstairs for breakfast, and when his colleagues checked in on him, they found him completely unresponsive in his hotel room. They immediately, of course, called for help and tried to perform CPR on him, but it was unfortunately too late. Dan was pronounced dead at the scene, and he was only 54 years old. At first, of course, rumors were flying around, especially just given the nature of the tour and the fact that the Annabelle doll was involved in the tour and he was her main handler. But the Pennsylvania State Police were very clear. There were no signs of foul play, no strange circumstances, no evidence of anything suspicious, and the preliminary ruling was that his death was just from natural causes. We obviously don't know the exact cause yet. The autopsy report hasn't been released at the time that I'm recording this, but some sources close to Dan have said that he had just been under a lot of stress. And let's be honest, I'm pretty sure these tours are pretty intense. It's a lot of events, a lot of talking, probably some time away from your family, constant travel, late nights, emotional stories, and maybe he was just feeling a bit stressed because of that. The kind of lifestyle can wear anyone down, even someone who is deeply passionate about the work. But still, it came as a total shock to everyone. He wasn't someone that people expected to just go, not like that, not so suddenly, and not right after doing what he loved most. And I think that's what makes it all feel so surreal, is that he just spent the weekend surrounded by people who admired him and doing the work he'd spent years dedicating his life to. Then in the quiet of the hotel room that night, he just passed away. After Dan had passed, the initial reaction from the paranormal community, and honestly the wider population, was of course just heartbreak, but almost immediately the internet did what it does best and started spreading rumors. And of course, people started linking his death to the Annabelle doll. Lots of headlines popped up saying things like "investigator dies after haunted doll tour," and social media comments were full of theories, everything from curses to demonic retaliation. Some even claimed that the doll should never have left the museum in the first place. But the truth is, the authorities did make it very clear that Dan died of natural causes, so we'll never truly know what happened, but there were no signs of trauma, no signs of foul play, and nothing strange or supernatural at the scene. So nothing really points to it being the doll. Of course, the doll is very haunted and extremely dangerous, but it could have been anyone then, why specifically Dan? And the police called it just a very unfortunate tragedy, and obviously we're still waiting for the final autopsy, so we don't know exactly what happened yet. Dan's very close friends and fellow investigators, including people from NESPR, were of course very quick to shut down the idea that something paranormal caused his death. One of them, called Jason Hawes from Ghost Hunters, actually posted publicly saying that blaming the doll was not only disrespectful, it was very cruel. Dan is a father, a husband, and a friend, and he's not just some character in the horror movie, and people were just jumping to conclusions without knowing the full fact. Even Dan's team ended up speaking up, saying that he would have hated the idea of people turning his death into a ghost story. He was the kind of guy who always emphasized caution, respect, and science-backed methods when investigating the unexplained. He never wanted to scare people for the sake of it. He wanted people to understand. So it makes sense that he wouldn't want the story to spiral out of control and have people think that it was Annabelle, because that would just scare people and make them probably not want to visit the doll and learn more about the paranormal and unexplained. And that's of course just what makes the sensationalism feel so off. It is very weird timing, I'll agree with, and yes, it was of course very unexpected, but not everything in the paranormal world is paranormal. People can still just pass away because they're human. Sometimes people we care about leave us too soon and in a very strange way, and that's painful enough without adding a layer of drama on the top. But even though Dan's gone, the impact that he has made on the paranormal world has not faded at all. In the days following his death, tributes started pouring in from all over the world. Fellow investigators, friends, fans, and people who had even only met him once or twice shared lots of stories about how kind, generous, and passionate he was about his work. And what came through in all of it was that Dan wasn't in this for the attention. He was definitely in it to be helping people. He helped people feel a lot less afraid, less alone, whether it was something living in a house that they thought might be haunted or someone just curious about the unknown. Dan made time for everyone. He had this gift for talking about the dark, eerie things in a way that felt quite comforting. Like you weren't just hearing ghost stories, you were learning something and you'd feel educated afterwards. You were being guided by someone who genuinely cared about your stories. Even on social media, his following was not built on shock value at all. It was completely built on trust. People followed Dan on TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook because they knew that he brought insight, not just hype. He didn't rely on jump scares or very dramatic voiceovers. He completely told the truth in his videos, and he said it calmly, respectfully, and it's pretty rare nowadays for someone to just be themselves online and on the internet and just share what they're passionate about. And yeah, nowadays there's lots of people in it for just clout, so it is quite rare. After Dan's death, NESPR announced that the Annabelle tour would continue, not as a marketing move, but as a way of honoring Dan's work and the legacy that he helped build. According to the team, Dan definitely would have wanted the education to carry on, for people to keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep approaching the paranormal with both curiosity and caution. A few of his colleagues even said the show must go on, especially for Dan, and honestly, that says a lot, because even though the work he did was full of mystery and fear, the feeling that people associate with Dan is full of warmth. Today, of course, his name still lives on in the paranormal community, not just as an investigator, but as someone who just made people feel very safe, seen, and heard in the strangest field out there. And of course, a seasoned investigator on tour with one of the most infamous haunted objects in the world, suddenly gone just hours after the event. People are probably going to start asking questions, and the questions they're asking is, was it just a coincidence or was something deeper at play? I think we should treat it as a coincidence, and it was just something that happened. Dan was human. Let's not blame the paranormal objects because he probably wouldn't have wanted us to, and we may never know the full story. So whether you believe in haunted dolls or not, there's no denying the very strange weight that this story carries. And there has, of course, been past incidences where people also believe the Annabelle doll had hurt or been the reason for someone's passing. It's also displayed that way in some of the movies of the Annabelle doll. But I think that, this is real life. This is not a movie. And it's quite impossible to prove that it was the doll. But anyways, from that, I'm sure the paranormal community is going to miss Dan very much. And I send my deepest condolences to his friends, his family, and everyone that he worked with. He was a great man and very loved by a lot of people. I just thought that it was important to share his story in and amongst all of these theories and crazy things going on social media and people making a lot of assumptions. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like it. And if you had seen Dan on TV or met him or was on one of the tours, I would love to hear about it. So please comment down below if you'd had any experiences with Dan or watching him. I would love to read them. And I will see you next week for another dark, creepy, or weird video. Bye.